Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for the next episode of the On the Mark podcast and financial forum. I have a guest today, Jacob Kendall, who we're excited to have today. He's got some unique perspectives and things that we'll want to pick his brain about in all different areas of the senior world. So, Jacob, thank you so much for joining us. And we'd love for you to introduce yourself to the audience.
Yeah, thanks, Mark, for the invitation and opportunity to have a good conversation. So yeah, I'm Jacob Kendall, and I usually, when I have these kinds of intros or whatever, I say that there are two aspects of my own background that influence everything I do professionally. One is the professional side. I have advanced training in several different areas. That's how I prefer it. I'd much rather be a jack of all trades rather than an expert of one. And so, as a gerontologist, someone who studies aging, my background is truly interdisciplinary. That's an academic term. Maybe I'll say multidimensional. I love connecting the dots related to aging on various issues related to aging, senior living, ageism, chronic disease, dementia, hospice, these different areas. If I could say to have an expertise in one area, it's like bigger picture thinking, public health. So looking at economics, policy, demographic, epidemiological trends. So I love doing that. And on the personal side, to bring it back down to more of a micro level, I've had 2 open heart surgeries. I have complex medical needs. I'm not an older adult myself yet. I'm about to turn 39 in 2 days. But
Happy birthday.
thanks. Having, my own lifelong disability and being a patient and whatnot, I can relate to many of the issues with older adults navigating healthcare, which is ridiculously expensive. And
Yes.
none of these things happens in a vacuum with when it comes to medical care and senior living and living arrangements and caregiving. All those things are connected to one another. So it just gives me a way of relating to that. Plus, as a patient, like we have so many things that we need to do better with our health system and all these other systems. And like I'm living it, right? I
Yeah.
want to make those improvements because I know that they affect me.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you have a very unique perspective because you understand what seniors are going through, but you're obviously not a senior. So that's not a common perspective that we see. So I'm excited to talk with you today. And I think, the fact that you have a sense of all these different aspects of what people go through, both from a medical perspective as well as emotional. And, there's so much intertwined with seniors and just people who have health needs in general. There's so much to that. And the health system, for somebody, I'll speak for myself, I'm not a healthcare professional per se. And even just navigating medical billing alone is so
Oh,
difficult.
I
And we
know.
see, for clients of ours that have, mortgage applications with us for just a regular everyday purchase transaction or refinance, we often see, these small medical collection bills that they didn't know existed. And,
Uh,
it's tough. It's a lot to navigate, especially when you're going through some sort of physical challenge or surgery or whatever it may be, to then keep track of all the financial piece of it and the billing and all that
yeah.
stuff. It's a lot. That could be a whole podcast in and of itself
Well,
with
yeah.
multiple
I'm
episodes.
I'm a former professor. That could be an entire semester long course.
Yes, absolutely. Well, I think one of the common threads that we see with all different aspects of aging is the financial piece. And it's difficult to navigate. And I think if we're for the sake of today's conversation, focusing primarily on the challenges that seniors have, there are some very significant costs that seniors have to deal with, whether it be home care, which is probably on the higher end of the spectrum of cost,
Yeah.
assisted living, even with VA benefits or long-term care policies, they usually come up short of the
Yeah.
total
Yeah.
cost of the care that people actually want to have.
Yeah.
And the issue that we see often, I'd like to get your opinion on it, is that oftentimes people don't prepare early enough in advance of those issues. So then they come into like a crisis situation where they're
Yep.
really limiting their options of what they can do because they weren't really planning ahead. So I'd be
Yep.
curious to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, absolutely. This is one of the main things that I talk about is that I think it's a combination of American culture and I'm interested to see if it's a bit of a generational difference as well. So first of all, with American culture, we're very much in the here and now and local. We're very individualistic and we're just terrible at planning in advance
Yeah.
for what we don't want to talk about our own death. I actually think that the more we embrace our own mortality, the more we increase our quantity and quality. That seems counterintuitive, but I think that it's
No,
100% true.
I agree with you 100%.
Yeah, we wait till crises hit before we deal with them. And these can be medical crises. These can be having to be a caregiver, right? Caregiver for your own older spouse or for your aged parent or whatever. Um, and, planning for your funeral and for those who are going to survive after you and all these different things. But I think that it could be somewhat of a generational piece because my grandfather, I'll use this as an example. It was my last grandparent. He died late last year at 96 or 97. And I remember him saying at one point that he didn't plan ahead for these things because he did not expect to live this long.
Right.
Life expectancy when he was born, it made sense that he didn't expect to live this long. But I think that we're probably getting better at learning that's like we're going to live to older ages now. So it'll be interesting to see what these, I hate to use the word generation, but these younger cohorts, do we become better at planning for this now that we know that population aging is a real thing? But you're absolutely right. There are so many issues right now with people not planning ahead. But listen, it's not just an individual issue. It is a systemic issue. The official retirement age in the US is 65, but we're getting to the point now with increasing life expectancy that people are living nearly a third of their lives in retirement. And we have to have serious questions about whether that is sustainable or not. And those are just the kinds of conversations that we have to have. We need to be discussing policies where employers don't just include childcare, but they include care for older parents as a part of their employee support and other things like that. We are at that place and we need to be having those conversations.
Yeah, and it takes a village, as they say. So it's employers, it's individuals planning for themselves, it's, government benefits. It's a whole system of I hate to say it, inadequacies of someone's got to pick up the ball, and usually it falls on the individual themselves to figure it out. But it's so vast to navigate. Most people just get paralyzed and they just don't do anything.
Yeah.
And your point about how people are living longer is well said, because the longer you live, the earlier you need to plan if you want to, for example, have an investment account that's growing or an IRA that's growing. The longer you have it, the more it's growing and the more money you have to, theoretically liquidate it when you get to that stage of life and need to pay for care. But it becomes more and more important. But you're right, that generation that's at that approximate age, let's say in their 70s, 80s, come from a generation where they didn't expect to live as long as they are living.
Yeah.
And at some point, the well runs dry. You have a certain amount of resources that you gather over time. And when there's different economic factors and all those types of things that play into that. And I think, I don't know how familiar you are with this, but some of the like employer backed plans that might pay for long-term care have limitations on them. And are usually they're just going to give you like an inch of a leg up. They're not really reliable as a full source, but people say, well, I have insurance. I have life insurance because I have my employer. Well, what happens when you're not with your employer anymore?
Yeah.
So there's some unique challenges to that. But I think the financial side of it is really critical. And one of the things that we focus on is how to use the home as leverage to be able to pay for care. Meaning, a lot of times people want to keep their home because there's an emotional attachment. Maybe they want to do home care, they want to age at home, but they really don't want to let that go. And even if they're moving into assisted living, maybe they won't like it. Maybe they'll just say, it's not for me. I want to go back home. If you've already sold your home, you can't really do much about it. And there's all sorts of tax implications of selling, in advance of passing versus if the family sells it afterwards, that we won't get too far into. But as the cost of care has gone up, now you have this sort of tsunami of all these people who haven't prepared because they didn't plan to live this long. But the cost of care is getting higher and higher as time goes on. And the other thing we've learned through other conversations we've had is that the number of caregivers has also gone down. It's not necessarily that it's gone down. It's more that there aren't enough people to take care of all the people who are about to need care.
Yeah.
And that's sort of a scary upcoming issue that I think we're going to start to see play out. Maybe we already have to a degree, but
in my doctorate program, I was trained by a demographer. If you don't mind, I can mention a couple of demographic trends that
absolutely.
speak to it. So yeah, this is, if you look at it's called a pig in the python. If you look at it over time, the age sex pyramid, the baby boom generation is the thicker part of the column, and now it's getting to the point where I think they're halfway through the retirement age, and then I think in the next few to several years, all of them will be beyond retirement age. That's what we're experiencing. That's what you mean by there are few people to care for them. We also, on top of that, have a lot of people moving away. There's more moving, there's more migration. Transportation and communications technology is rapidly advancing. It allows for this. And you have concepts like intimacy at a distance, which basically means how are family members who are living geographically apart able to stay close to one another. And it's not uncommon to have working class adults managing the care of their aged parents from large geographical distances,
Sure.
right? And
Absolutely.
then
I'm
I'm
doing it
definitely,
myself right now. My
yeah, I
family's
mean,
in
it's,
Seattle. I'm in Los Angeles right now. That we're doing it
yeah,
from a distance. Not
That's
easy.
that's what happened. Actually, that's what happened with my grandfather that I mentioned, is that he did not want to leave his house. We invited him to come down here and stay with us after his son, my dad, died. And anyway, that's another conversation. But you are right that as an issue. The other thing I want to mention here is, and I promise that I'm not trying to be contentious, I'm just mentioning a real issue here. You said caregivers earlier. None of this happens in a vacuum, and all of the different major policy issues that are on the table right now are all connected to one another. And yes, I will mention a contentious one, not because I want to be contentious, but because it actually is a reality. It's immigration. Those who can afford in-home care, they're obviously on the wealthier end, but it's not an insubstantial number of older Americans. And look, I get it. I understand why the overwhelming desire is to die in your own home. I get it. I want that. That's what most people want. It's totally understandable. I encourage that. But of course, the most expensive way to do it once you get sick is to stay in your own home and pay someone to come there. And increasingly, what demographic is serving those home health care roles? It's immigrants. That's actually a demographic fact. And so I just think that people need to understand, listen, all these different policy issues are related to one another. So think about this when you make these kinds of your own voting decisions and whatnot. And like I always told my students, because we tend to think economically and politically in this country. The government hires more political scientists and more economists than they do of anyone else. But I always tell my students, don't ignore demography. Ignore demography at your own peril, because we have to account for these demographic trends. We have to account, and you can look at the states where a larger percentage of older adults live in nursing homes. That's in the Midwest and the Rust Belt, where largely the working age adults and their children have moved away. So migration patterns definitely relate to this, right?
Sure.
And you can see in the parts of the country where a larger percentage of Americans live or are able to live at home into their old age. And those are Arizona, Texas, and California, all border states, all large numbers of immigrants. And that's where older adults, if they can afford to do so, that's where they go live during their retirement, because those are attractive climates, right? None of these things happen in a vacuum. So demographically, to understand what's going on, even down to the level of looking at financially and the individual decisions that these families are making, we cannot ignore these demographic trends. I'm sorry, I got preachy, but that's the
No,
nerdy stuff I
it's
get at.
very interesting. I love this kind of stuff because numbers talk, they tell a story. And if you
Yeah.
don't listen, you're going to miss the story.
Yeah.
And I listen, every session I do on this podcast, I learn something new. And that's definitely a nugget I will keep with me because it's, that's really honestly not something I had thought of before, but it makes a lot of sense. And people's voting decisions matter for lots of reasons. That's definitely one of them. So if aging is one of your considerations, these are the things that you want to be mindful of. And
Yeah.
it's just a big challenge because, living in those states is also generally more expensive, but maybe
Yep.
maybe
Yep.
the data would prove this, that the reason why caregivers are in those states providing the home care services is because they can get paid more to do it in those places than they
Yeah.
might.
That's where their clients are.
Yeah, exactly. And we find, just the general trends that I've seen as far as the cost of care, let's say assisted living tends to be theoretically less expensive on a general basis in the middle part of the country. And as you get further out on either coast, it becomes probably more expensive overall, or toward borders, or, whatever it may be. That's
Yeah.
seems to be a trend that we've seen. But I think, and I'd love to get your opinion on this, but the key for all of this is planning and education. And that's exactly why we do this podcast, is to just continue for so many reasons with so many guests who are all saying the same thing: prepare in advance, prepare, because so many people don't, and you have a fraction of the options if you don't prepare than
Yeah.
if you do. And the preparation is potentially decades. It's not a week,
Yeah.
it's not a month, it's not a year. It's preparing long term. That's why they call it a long-term care policy, or you know, financials in
Yep.
general. If you're looking at an investment account or real estate or whatever your investment of choice is, the longer you're in it in general, the better you do with it. And it's so difficult to pay for care just off of regular income. Like, you have to find other ways to do it.
Yeah, I
So
agree. I remember talking to someone who I think she was actually making a real observation, but it was half joke, all serious about how there was something popping up like life insurance companies were sitting next to uh, chapels where people get married or something like that. The idea is that you need to start. This is what my wife and I did not long after we married. Like, hey, we got to talk about life insurance. We got to talk about these things now,
yeah,
decades in advance, not just for ourselves but for our children. Like, I completely agree with you. You need to start making these decisions and having these conversations. And it's not just the practical side of it, it's the emotional side of it as well. Because if you've avoided talking about your own impending disability later in life, your own impending mortality later in life, or that of your spouse, when it hits as a crisis, you're going to be completely unprepared for it emotionally.
yes, it's true. Yeah, between the emotional side and the financial side, it's like, which one's going to get you first? They're intertwined, of course, but
Absolutely.
one could cause the other, and vice
Oh
versa.
yeah. Oh yeah. Yep.
So we actually do something kind of interesting. So we do mortgages of all types. We have a specialty in lending to seniors and helping them pay for care, but we also deal with first time home buyers and all the nuances that they have. And what we find is that they often don't have any professional financial advice. And so they come to us for a loan, and they've saved just enough to buy a home. And then completely starting over financially because they've now just gone through all of their savings, or the vast majority of it, to be able to buy a home, which is, can be a good decision. Maybe not, depends. But one of the things that we do, we actually wrote a little, I wouldn't call it it's not a novel or anything, but a little book that's called "You've Just Closed, But Your Work Is Not Done Yet." And this is not a plug for my book. I don't sell books. I just give them away to people that will use them as a good resource. But the idea is, okay, now you own this really valuable asset. You need life insurance, because if something happens to you, you want to be able to have your family be able to still stay in the home, or you need, a disability insurance plan, or you need an estate plan. You need to dictate what's going to happen with that property if something happens to you. You were referring to how those are difficult conversations to have, but they're absolutely critical. But building that financial team around you, because I do finance for a living, but it's mortgage related, real estate related. But I know when to raise a flag and say, you need this type of professional, you need tax advice, you need, whatever it is, financial advisor, life insurance, long-term care insurance. And we pride ourselves on being able to connect people with the right people. But
Yeah.
that's like part of our mission, is to get information out there so people know how to prepare. It's not just like everybody knows they should prepare, but how do you do it? What does a full financial team even look like? And so that's what our gift is to our past clients who have just closed, but their work is not done yet. So we're trying, with our
Yeah.
reach, we're trying things like the conversation we're having today are designed specifically to get information out there and just help people understand, because sometimes they just get paralyzed by the thought
Yep.
of it being such a big ordeal or endeavor that they don't do anything.
Yeah, and I think financial scams are most common among older adults. At least they're one of the more common groups. And my grandfather was like, I don't want to go take my car to get it fixed or this or that, because they're going to take advantage of an old man. And unfortunately, that is a reality. This is why, again, go back to the village approach. And I'm assuming that if you have a client or you're working with someone who's older, like, it's oftentimes their adult children are with them, right?
Yes,
You need to have kind of multiple layers there, because you have those realities out there. And now financial planning and these different aspects of finances related to aging, it's big business. And of
it
course,
is.
and senior living is too. Like, these are capitalistic industries, right? But I think it's getting to the point, if it's not already there, I don't know the numbers, where the competition will hopefully keep the cost from that being too exorbitant.
Yeah.
But find some folks who are in your, good folks like y'all who are willing to be in your corner and really fight for what's going to be good for you. And those options exist. Don't do it alone because it can be overwhelming. And ideally, make it a family thing. I would say the same thing for healthcare, by the way. Yeah. So
Yeah, it's definitely a family affair. We're oftentimes not just talking with one person about a loan that maybe had, especially for a senior. Sometimes it's the opposite. When it's a younger couple buying, it's the parents who are involved. And as the parents get older, you have that transition where the kids become the parents for the parents.
yeah.
So it's interesting. But yeah, listen, I really appreciate your time. I would love, this is how we end every episode, is if there was one thing that you wish everyone knew and you just like shake your head like, oh God, why didn't they know that one thing? If they had done X or if they knew X, what would that be for you? What's the one message you want to leave for the audience? Sorry to put you on the spot. You can have two. It's okay. There's no limit, but just something you
I
hope the audience will take away from today's conversation.
I would just say really be willing to have conversations about things you didn't think you ever would. This is definitely true for older adults currently now, and probably more so for older men. Quite
Mhm.
frankly, I don't need to go to the doctor. I don't need to go join that social group. I'm fine. Well, you know what? You're not fine. Deal with or are able to manage things like divorce or job loss or loss of the spouse better than men are. Men have worse health outcomes. So definitely, be willing to have conversations about things that you never thought that you should. And death was this taboo topic for a while.
Yeah,
Cancer used to be the bad word. Now it's dementia. And I still hear too many stories of older adults like, I'm not going to talk about that. No, I'm not going to talk about that. You know what? When you find yourself saying that about something, that's the thing that you need to talk about.
that's
and
a
and
very
and,
good point.
and be prepared to be surprised by the actual benefit of talking about that thing. Like I
Yeah,
said earlier, the more we embrace our own mortality, I actually think we extend our lifespan and our health span. So just be okay with talking about things that you don't think that you should or that you used to not talk about. That's what I would say. I don't know if that's the kind of thing you're looking for, but that's what comes to mind at this
that
moment.
is. I mean, I love it because, and as you're talking, I'm thinking, check your pride at the door because I think genetically, we're predisposed to like always being strong and like, oh, I can handle
Yeah.
anything that comes at me. That's just in
Yeah.
our DNA, I think.
Pick
But
yourself up by your bootstraps kind of mentality. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. And that's definitely generational to a degree. And I think the
Yes.
baby boomers
Yes.
are even more prone to that. But if
Yeah.
you check your ego at the door and you just say, I need help, or I don't know how to do this, or you raise a flag and you employ or get the help of people who actually care, you're
Yep.
going to be in a much
Yep.
better spot. So I couldn't agree with you more.
Awesome.
So, all right. Well, Jacob, thank you so much for joining today. We'd love to have you back another time. I think you give a great perspective on the educational and the data side, which I love because I'm a data nerd myself. I love data because it always tells a story. So, thank you
Yeah.
so much for joining us. And we hope to see everyone again on the next episode of On the Mark. Thank you so much. Have a great day.
Thanks for the conversation.
You bet.